Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute my mic now that we have this incredible new intro going on. Welcome to the show. It is the 16th of September, 2025. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm still recovering from getting my face stomped on by my doggy. So a little bit of a black eye still going on there. Not to worry, the dog is to blame. This morning, we're going to talk about news like we always talk about news, but we have to talk about something that is kind of like a much larger issue, because when I logged into the Patreon question feed this morning from all of our fabulous Patreon subscribers, it was just absolute sheer panic and terror and fear. And I have to tell you all that, of course, as we have talked about many times here, that is the object and of what they're trying to do. It is also a means of control. And it's a good day to actually talk about how to respond to all of this, okay? Because one of the things that is so key about what they're trying to do right now is that it actually fits a very classic pattern that we have seen over and over and over and over and over again since 2017. And as everybody knows, one of the keys to kind of actually taking action in this era against this regime is to learn how to manage your emotions in response to it. So I have a lot of news stories that we're going to talk about today. Fani Willis, Lisa Cook, South Korean workers, Judge Chutkan's ruling yesterday, a whole slew of other things, okay? But the thing that is top of mind right now are all of the many threats that are being made against the left, quote unquote, Democrats, quote unquote, anybody who speaks out, anybody exercising their First Amendment rights to criticize this government or to make comments about Charlie Kirk's actual words or to do anything that this administration doesn't like. So let's just talk about this for a second, okay? Because we have to kind of like lay the groundwork pretty clearly for where we sit, all right? This administration has been threatening people on the left forever, and literally has been doing it like kind of from the moment that they took office. Let's not forget that that has included targeting individual university professors, presidents of universities, protesters against the genocide in Gaza, anyone who has spoken out against Donald Trump, anyone who has supported Kamala Harris, anybody who has taken a position that supports progressive causes, anybody who's an immigrant, anybody who's trans, anybody who's LGBTQ, right? Like on and on and on and on and on and on and on it goes. And, you know, I have reached a point, and I said this morning on Blue Sky, and frankly, I think this is a logically appropriate position that I would recommend that everybody else take, where it has started to all become just noise, okay? Because the thing to remember about this is that they have been making these threats for a very, very long time. And yes, of course, they have power. And yes, of course, some of these threats they're going to try to execute on. Not all. We already know they're capable of violence. And when they choose to do that, they're going to execute on it. And that's entirely out of our control. But the things that they're threatening now are really not that different from any of the things that they have been threatening for a very long time. The same, by the way, is true of all of these right-wing podcasters who now claim that, you know, the left is inciting violence when they've been out there claiming that trans people should be wiped off the face of the earth, that Black people don't deserve equal rights, that, violence should be perpetrated against, any number of marginalized groups. So, the thing you have to do when you hear them saying these sorts of things, when you hear the president saying these sorts of things, is a two-part analysis. The first is to ask yourself whether or not you individually, you as a specific individual, are under direct and immediate threat. This is a really important analysis, by the way, for the white folks in the audience, because the chances are very solid that unless you, and unfortunately one of our audience members on Patreon, this is the case, have ended up on some kind of a list, you yourself personally as a white person, unless you are of another marginalized identity, are probably not under immediate threat right now. Okay. And that's something that is in the nature of the white supremacist faction of this government, like the whole way in which they operate, right? They're not really coming after white cishet people. That's just kind of like how it is. All right. The second thing you have to ask yourself is whether or not they're actually going to be able to fulfill on any of these threats. And this is the place where I really want people to start thinking logically. Okay. Is Donald Trump going to be able to persecute, commit violence, drag people out of their homes against 50% of the United States population? The answer to that is 100% no. And this is one reason why I get kind of like upset when people are so panicked, right? Because you have to look at this through like the lens of what they actually have the manpower to do and what they actually are likely to be able to do, and also the ways in which they are continuously being stopped, okay? So, you know, Kelly Hayes, who is a tremendous activist and organizer in Chicago, also the co-author of Let This Radicalize You with Mariam Kaba, talked about this over the weekend. And she pointed out that there's a whole list of things that have already stopped certain things that they wanted to do in their tracks. Sometimes it's the courts, and everybody can be as cynical as you want about the Supreme Court, but some of those orders have stuck. Sometimes it's people in the streets running ICE out of their own communities or defending certain apartment blocks that have people in them who are undocumented, or otherwise just simply refusing to allow ICE to be present in a particular community through all sorts of means, immediate pop-ups, organized protests, blockades, okay? Then there's the fact that, like, you know, they're actually being stopped sometimes by words, right? ICE is rolling out in Chicago like crazy, but J.B. Pritzker's words at least seems to, for the time being, have stopped the National Guard from rolling into Chicago, okay? So there's all sorts of means by which they actually are being stymied in their plans, okay? And on top of that, of course, they are going to exploit a crisis. I said this last week about Charlie Kirk's killing, right? That as with any other big event, they're going to try to find some way to exploit it for their own purposes, okay? So this time the exploitation looks like there's got to be somebody trans in the area of the shooter, or somebody in his family, one of his friends, somebody he lives with, maybe his lover is trans. Somebody trans has to be to blame somewhere. We knew they were going to do that, okay? We saw that coming from a mile away, all right? The second thing that they're going to do is find a means to play the victim. They did that last week too. They're doing it now. They're doing it consistently. Even though right-wing podcasters and people on the right, and even the president himself, have called for violence against people they disagree with continuously, and people they don't like, and people they think shouldn't belong in the country, and people they think don't have a right to exist. So, you know, one of the things that we need to do in the face of all of this is decide how it's going to condition our response. All right. And this is where the rubber really meets the road on this stuff. Okay. Because if they're going to just threaten everything that they've always threatened, and maybe they may threaten it a little louder this time, and sure, they do have power, and there are many examples of them actually carrying out violence. We know that, right? I don't mean to diminish that. But one of the things that I just want people to think through here is like, what is their louder screaming of the same threats designed to do? It's designed to terrify you into hiding and being frozen and doing nothing and thinking that like speaking out on social media is going to make you an immediate target. Because what they want is to silence anybody who disagrees with what they're doing. And why would they want that? Because when people disagree, and they disagree publicly, they inspire others to participate in acts of resistance. So all of this is by design. It's very clearly like out of the fascist playbook. You know, all you have to do is go read Jason Stanley's book, which I know I've recommended like 1,000 times here, but you can go read How Fascism Works. And you will see that this is all part of a very clear roadmap. And the decision that each one of us has to make is whether or not we are going to allow ourselves to be terrified into silence. Okay. I have come to kind of a place about this where, like I said, it has all started to sound like noise. And I have to say that for somebody who is kind of like front and center as a commentator, that may sound a little nuts. I will tell you, I happen to be paying attention to the channels of other people who have been commenting from the left on Donald Trump, and many of them were remarkably silent at the end of last week, not yours truly. So some of the terrorizing has worked. Some of these channels that have like 5 million people did not put out a video for 2 days because of this. And that in and of itself is a little disturbing. Like, where's your courage, first of all, and second of all, you got to have an analysis about like your own risk, right? Because, some of us are under deeper threat than others. Okay. But all that said, one of the things that we're all going to have to come to terms with is that, like, of course there's going to be violence. There's already been violence. There's ongoing violence, right? Does the potential of violence continuing or louder threats than the volume that the same threats were at a week ago, is that enough to make you stop doing anything? Is it enough to make you like stay at home and not get together with your neighbors and talk about how to make the world better? Is it enough to make you like maybe decide not to show up at a rally or like allow ICE to run into your neighborhood and kidnap your neighbors? Okay, so again, I want this audience to be very thoughtful about, like, one, actual risk, two, the intent for all of these threats, three, whether or not they actually have a capacity to carry it out, and four, and this is the most important thing, how you personally are choosing to respond, because that is within your control, right? You have a choice to decide what your behavior is going to be in response to this, like, louder version of the same threats. And frankly, I have to say that I don't want to discount the fact that there are a lot of people right now who are newly afraid. And we talked last week about, like, why are you newly afraid now when you weren't afraid 2 days ago? That in and of itself speaks of a certain form of privilege, right? You can go back and watch last week's broadcast about this, because I stand by that, okay? If you weren't afraid 2 days before and you were afraid then because of Charlie Kirk, chances are very solid that you were not under threat to begin with, okay? Because lots of people have been afraid for a very long time and have managed to continue organizing and keep going. I just want everyone to, like, take a deep breath, right? Because when I log on and I see, like, oh my God, I'm terrified. Oh, this is so scary. Everything is so horrible. I have to say to all of you, because I care about you and because you're my audience, pause for a second and, like, engage your rational, logical, mature brain and consider what, everything that I've described already. I'm not going to repeat myself. It's really important to do this, because otherwise the aims of what they are trying to do with all of this language and loudness and repetition and all of it is to do exactly is to get exactly the reaction that you're giving them, which is like, I'm terrified, I'm going to wipe all my social media. Okay. So I want to talk about that for a second, because there have been a couple people in our audience who have been targeted by these, like, lists that have been created since, Charlie Kirk's unfortunate killing or since for other reasons in various states. Okay. So let me just say one thing. If you live in a state where they are making a target list of teachers and you are a teacher, you may want to make specific decisions about what you post on social media or not. But is, like, the average random person, like, you have to use your brain about this. Okay. Don't get me wrong. Like, don't have, like, I've said this many, many times here, but, like, I know people who have gotten knocks on their door from the Secret Service because they've posted something that sounds like a threat of violence against the administration. Don't do that. Okay. Like, that's obvious, right? But if what we're talking about is, like, the exercise of your free speech, right? You have an opinion about something that is happening in this country. I don't see any reason for the average person to, like, wipe their entire social media feed. I have friends who are, like, very senior organizers who have done that for very specific privacy concerns. But for the average everyday person, that's not something that, in my mind, seems like it's necessary. Now, everybody has to make their own risk assessment, okay? It may be different if you happen to be somebody who is of a marginalized identity. It may be something different if you happen to be undocumented. Every single risk assessment is something that you're going to have to kind of do on the basis of who you are and your intersecting identities, okay? But all of this, I have to remind everybody that the number one rule of combating fascism is do not comply in advance. Okay. They're not coming for you right now. I assume, I hope not. If you happen to be kind of like a white cishet, potentially privileged person watching this broadcast, right? I get very troubled when I see white people, particularly white people of a certain degree of privilege, talking about how they're panicked and terrified that their social media is going to result in them being targeted by, like, I don't know whom, right? So I want people to be, again, very thoughtful about this. And of course, there are conditions in which you have to think about social media always, right? Like, I'll just remind everybody, making threats against, senior members of the administration is a felony. Like, don't commit crimes, right? Like, this is obvious. But at the same time, you have to make a decision about like whether or not you're going to be cowed and whether or not you're going to hide and whether or not you're going to kind of like silence yourself out of fear that they may at some point randomly, who knows why, come for you, or whether you're going to take a stand like some of the more courageous among us who actually are on Stephen Miller's lists and were long before this administration came into office, and actually make a decision to resist and stand up and do the right thing and organize your neighbors and get together with your friends and talk about how to make the country or your own neighborhood a better place, a safer place, a place where everyone can be accepted and free. So, this is something that we all have to analyze. And at the same time, I just have a perspective on this that is really very plain and simple. Okay. Like, there's nothing that we can do. I'm going to make this really clear. There's nothing that we can do to stop them from making threats. Okay? They're going to do that. You should expect that they're going to do that. You should probably even expect that they're going to get louder because they're weak and because the disapproval ratings of President Trump are in the toilet and because nobody wants to watch their neighbors be rounded up and deported to third-party countries where they're going to be tortured and killed. Right? Because lots of people, have like friends who are here on like temporary protected status or who are undocumented or who are here as dreamers, right? Because like the vast majority of this country believes in marriage equality and LGBTQ freedom and equality, right? They're doing all of this because they're weak and because they know they're weak and because they know they're losing. So all of this has to be taken through that lens. And this is one reason why you've got to be in community with other people doing good work. You know why? Because other people who are doing good work not only will give you hope and not only will give you a sense of community, but also will talk you off the ledge, which of course is something that like I try to do here every day. Some days I can't do it because, shit is bad, but I try. Okay. So that's my little rant on that today. And, the other thing I just have to say here is that I have friends who were at a conference in Chicago earlier this year for activists and organizers where there was an acknowledgement that probably within a year, some of the people in that room were going to be dead. Some of the people in that room were going to be incarcerated by the administration as political prisoners. That's a possibility. And yet those people keep going. Okay. And if they can do it, so can the average everyday person in their own community, in their own neighborhood around the country. That's what I have to say about that. All right. And just remember, like, they want us terrorized and afraid. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to give that to them voluntarily. So that's that. All right. We have to talk about a whole bunch of like developing events. So yet again yesterday, the Trump administration bombed another Venezuelan boat, complete with another snuff film, which they promptly launched out onto social media. Again, I have to point out this is an extrajudicial killing. It violates international law. They have a suspicion, therefore they're murdering people. This is not moral, legal, or right. And I think that one of the reasons why this is happening is simply because they want to be able to put out on social media the murder of people that are brown so that they look tough. And that in and of itself is something that is worth noting as a tactic. I also have to talk about what happened with Judge Chutkan's ruling yesterday, because there were a lot of questions about this on the Patreon feed. So over the weekend, Judge Chutkan, who you will remember handled one of Trump's prosecution cases by Jack Smith, heard an emergency series of motions by 5 men who had been deported to Ghana by the Trump administration for intentional conveyance then to their home countries from which they had previously been granted protected status due to threat of torture or persecution by the United States. Okay, so these were people who were here on protected status. And unfortunately, because these men had already been turned over to Ghanian authorities, Judge Chutkan ruled that she did not have the authority to to stop them from then being conveyed to their home countries. Now, this is tragic. The opinion is really thoughtful and also sad in its own way, because you can tell that Judge Chutkan knows that the implications of this are extremely grave for these 5 men. And simultaneously, a United States federal court judge cannot exercise jurisdiction over a foreign government. So that is essentially the basis of what the ruling is. And again, one of the ways that we have to understand this is that the Trump administration is exploiting every possible loophole, right? They know that the Ghanian government is going to turn these men over to countries where they're going to be tortured, persecuted, and possibly murdered. They are doing that intentionally. That is also a part of them trying to look like they're tough and strong and, also white supremacists. So all of this, as it sits right now, is part of the same pattern. And it's one reason why these restraining orders that we have seen so far that prevent people from being deported in the first place are so important, right? Because once somebody is out of the country and conveyed to the custody of a foreign government, the United States courts are powerless to do anything to stop it. Yes, to the person in the comments who are saying we don't need allies, we need accomplices. That's been a longstanding slogan, by the way, of the progressive intersectional left. All right. We have to talk also for a second about this case involving Fani Willis, because this morning, the Georgia Supreme Court declined certiorari. So I'm going to remind everybody here what certiorari is. It doesn't apply in every state appeals court, but it does apply in the Georgia Supreme Court. It's also a similar thing to what happens in the United States Supreme Court, where you get through an appeals court and you petition the highest court to review the case, and the highest court has discretion essentially to decide whether or not to take the case. Georgia Supreme Court rejected Fani Willis's appeal to review a Georgia Court of Appeals case that said that she was without the authority to continue as a prosecutor of Donald Trump related to the 2020 election. Okay. All of those claims of attempting to interfere in the election and the like. This is likely the end of that case. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there's nowhere for this case to go beyond this. And the chances are very solid that this is the end. Because essentially they've ruled that because of the appearance of impropriety by Fani Willis and having had a prior relationship with a senior prosecutor on the team, she cannot continue as the district attorney. And that in and of itself is pretty much probably the end of the case. And again, we can have a lot of conversations here about the accountable escaping the wealthy and powerful escaping justice. I will remind everybody that this whole turn of events was started by one of Trump's co-conspirators, who is also an indictee in the Georgia case. But that is likely the end of that. And I will just say that it is not lost on me that this entire scenario is also deeply inflected with the white supremacist persecution of Black women, particularly this Black woman, simply for having had a relationship. I mean, there was no actual impropriety of any kind. And, by the way, let's remember that 2 of the defense attorneys in that case are married. So again, none of it is right, but it is where we are. Okay, so strange happenings at the Fed. Lisa Cook won her case yesterday in the Court of Appeals to remain as a governor on the Board of Governors for the Fed, and was given a stamp of approval from that Court of Appeals, that federal Court of Appeals, to attend today's Fed meeting where determinations are being made on interest rates. Simultaneously, the Senate confirmed Trump's alleged nominated replacement for Lisa Cook's seat, even though it's now been determined that Lisa Cook can't be fired by Trump. And so this has raised kind of like a very strange specter of what's happening at the Fed, none of which is good for stability. But for the moment, Lisa Cook remains as a governor on the Board of Governors. But wait, there's more. Several pieces of evidence came out this weekend concerning this allegation that was made by Bill Pulte, who has been out for Lisa Cook. He, again, Trump nominee, huge Trump donor, unethical himself, has committed the same acts that he's accused Lisa Cook of committing. All this evidence came out that Lisa Cook did not designate 2 homes, did not commit mortgage fraud, first of all, did not designate 2 homes as her primary residence simultaneously. Second home was designated as a vacation home, that the tax authority ruled that she had done nothing wrong, and that, literally there were no indications of mortgage fraud whatsoever in any of her paperwork. Okay. So Bill Pulte should resign. I mean, that's kind of a given. Not that I'm like expecting that it's going to take place, but Lisa Cook doesn't appear to have done anything wrong whatsoever. And let's also remember that this entire course of conduct precedes her nomination to the Board of Governors of the Fed. So couldn't possibly in any way have influenced, like all of this was already known to the confirmation hearing people in the Senate when she was up for confirmation. There's nothing here. There's nothing here. This is literally, again, I'm going to point it out, the persecution of a Black woman who Donald Trump doesn't like to try to gain control of a board where he wants to exercise power. He this morning in a press conference essentially said, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially said that he should have the ability to decide what interest rates are in this country. That like eliminates any independence of the Fed whatsoever. Like that's fundamentally the end of the American economy, but that's what he's after. And so again, there will probably be an appeal of this because God knows they appeal everything. But for now, Lisa Cook is okay. And that's good. That's like really, really good for a number of reasons. I was asked some questions on the Patreon feed about this situation with the South Korean workers who were rounded up at the Hyundai plant, who now have been returned to South Korea. The reports that have come out about the conditions in which, and let me just point one other thing out here. These people were here on legal work status, like literally Hyundai applied for the appropriate visas. They got the visas to be here. There was no question that these people were here on a protected status, doing their jobs on behalf of their parent company. 475 workers were rounded up. They were held for 8 days total before they were put back on a plane to South Korea in utterly deplorable conditions. And, again, this is no surprise because the United States is running a series of concentration camps now. But there are reports of them being held in cells where, that are meant for 10 people, where there's like 100 people packed in there, and they're laying like head to toe on cement floors to try to sleep. There's no toilet privacy of any kind. The food is scarce. There's no, again, all these conditions that we've heard about many, many times. And when these workers landed in South Korea, not only were there huge protests at the airport when they landed, including like big, huge posters with images of Donald Trump that said things like, but we're friends, right? But in addition to that, the people who were brought back said they will never come back to the United States again. And, you have to ask yourself, for an administration that claims to want foreign investment, that is issuing tariffs in some instances because they want like foreign people to bring their business, foreign companies to bring their business here. You have to ask like, what they're thinking. Not that any of it's rational, right? Don't get me wrong. I don't think any of it's rational. And Trump almost walked it back by saying like, oh, I kind of am talking to them about whether or not like people should be able to stay here to train our workers. Nobody wants to stay here if they're going to be thrown in a concentration camp. So all of this belies, again, their largest aim. And their largest aim is the persecution of anybody who is not white, cishet, able-bodied, and rich. And so the fallout from this particular raid on the Hyundai plant, the total fallout of it is yet to be seen. But I will tell you that my suspicion is that foreign companies that have plants, offices, other facilities here are going to be extremely cautious about making additional investments in the United States, and certainly would be foolish to not consider whether or not it actually makes any sense to visit the United States under this regime. So it's not good for business. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for our standing on the international stage. And I don't think the fallout from this is over yet. Okay. Before we go, I have to mention one thing about Epstein. So, while a whole bunch of stuff was going on over the weekend, and I mentioned this last week, we had the Senate vote down. This happened before the end of the last week, but the Senate voted down the release of the Epstein files, a resolution mandating the release of the Epstein files by one vote, Susan Collins. Now, still, there is a bill potentially being brought to the floor of the House where we need one vote, because there are some Republicans that have signed on to this, to require the total release of the Epstein files from the DOJ. And this is being co-led by Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who, by the way, is a member of the Freedom Caucus on the Republican side. So it's a good day if you are represented by a MAGA representative to make your phone calls and demand that they sign on to that resolution. Because if we can just flip one more vote, all of the Epstein files will be forced to be released. And that's like Great. Now, whether or not the DOJ will comply with that is another matter, but it's worth continuing to push. Okay. Last thing about that, though, on the Epstein front, because I feel like I have to say this every day right now, but I do really have to say it today. Okay. This thing of like everything's a distraction from Epstein really has to stop. Okay. Like killing Venezuelans on a boat is extrajudicial murder. That's not a distraction. Okay. Attempts to silence university professors, not a distraction, right? That's actually a straight impingement on the First Amendment. Okay. There are so many things going on at once. Not everything is a distraction. And we've really got to understand that, like, they can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? They can conduct ICE raids in major cities, and that's not a distraction. That's like the end of people's lives in some instances. So it's really important to stop tossing that language around, because what it does is it diminishes the harm and the impact of the other things that they're doing that are really significant, and, an escalation of an attempt to kind of consolidate authoritarian power. There's one other thing I actually want to say today before we go. There is this really disturbing thing happening among some left-leaning commentators, Ezra Klein being one of them, that appeared to me to circle back to where we started today, right? Which was this thing of like, are you going to comply in advance? Are you going to allow yourself to be silenced? Are you going to try to capitulate or cower or negotiate so that you yourself don't become a target? Okay. This morning, Ezra Klein has written, in addition to the piece he wrote last week about like Charlie Kirk was doing politics the right way by calling for like, all Black Americans to be removed from professional jobs, by calling for essentially the mass murder of like trans people. Right? Like, I mean, come on, like we can write that one off. All right. Today, he's got a piece out about him and Ben Shapiro. I mean, you have to laugh at this stuff sometimes, right? Him and Ben Shapiro. How do we take down the temperature in the country? Well, Ben Shapiro has routinely called for violence. You can just go look up his record, right? He's not somebody who's engaged in de-escalation. And so I just have to say this because, a couple people were like quoting Ezra Klein on the feed this morning, not Ezra Levin, who is the co-founder of Indivisible. Please understand there are two Ezras. We're talking about Ezra Klein. You have to be really careful right now about like where you are getting your opinion pieces. And I know I say this from time to time, and I know that I often have to repeat this. Okay, just because somebody is aligned with like the Democratic Party or the center left or even the left does not necessarily make their opinion reliable. And you truly have to vet all of this. Yes, Jenna just reminded me of one thing that's on my list. Again, you have to keep in mind that, you have to use your own media literacy when you read this stuff about whether or not their opinions are reliable, right? Like, I'm not really deeply invested right now in Ezra Klein's opinion about what this administration is doing because he's playing nicey nice with fascists. And that to me inevitably diminishes anything that he has to say. Not that he wasn't diminished in my mind to begin with, because I have a longstanding thing about where he sits. Okay. But all that said, you've got to be very thoughtful about this right now. Okay. You've got to be extremely thoughtful about where you're getting your information and where you're getting your opinions in particular. Yeah. Final thing I was going to mention today, which was on my list and I just hadn't gotten to it, is that Karen Attiah, who I really like and who I've been fortunate enough to have some personal conversations with, was fired from the Washington Post over the weekend, simply, according to the letter that she was sent, for making comments about white men in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's shooting. She was the last Black opinion writer at the Washington Post. This in and of itself is a sign of how far the Washington Post has fallen. It's also a sign of how much Jeff Bezos is controlling what's happening at WAPO. I unsubscribed from them years ago now, around the time that they started posting Islamophobic cartoons and, taking positions that just made literally no sense to me. But this is a sign of where we're at. And yet again, I will remind you, it is a reason why you need to support independent media. You need to support individual journalists and commentators who are out here like putting our own asses on the line to keep you informed, to tell you what's up. Karen has a Substack. She also teaches an online class. She's an amazing human being, also really, really kind and really smart. But you knew that already. You need to go support people, because that's one way in which you can make sure that, the voices of people who are being silenced by major media are not silenced permanently. So again, really critical. All All right. That's it for today, my friends. I'm here at regular time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, all week this week. And there will be a bonus broadcast on Friday for our Patreon subscribers. Reminder that until Friday, you can get 20% off an annual subscription over at patreon.com/resistancelive using the code podcast. We extended that promotion by a week because our podcasting facility had a little glitch last week and we wanted to give you guys a little bit of extra time. So head on over there and do that. And I will catch you all back here tomorrow. Please stay grounded, people. Like, I know it's really hard when like they're shouting louder than they were before, but do your best to stay grounded. All right. I'll catch you all back here tomorrow. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.